I saw my daughter-in-law wearing my wedding ring, the one I thought I had lost after my husband's death. My son laughed and said, "Dad never really loved you." I stayed silent and handed him an envelope. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought a simple family dinner could destroy everything I believed about my life in a single moment. The dining room was filled with the usual chatter: my sister Margaret discussing her grandchildren's college plans, my brother-in-law complaining about his golf game, and the warm aroma of the pot roast I'd spent all afternoon preparing. At 58, these family gatherings had become precious to me, especially since losing my husband Robert 2 years ago. That's when I saw it. The light from the chandelier caught something on Ellie's finger as she reached for the wine glass. My breath stopped. There, on my daughter-in-law's hand, was my wedding ring. The same delicate band with tiny diamonds that Robert had slipped onto my finger 35 years ago. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I set my fork down with trembling fingers, staring at the ring I thought I'd lost months after Robert's funeral. I'd torn the house apart looking for it, crying myself to sleep thinking I'd somehow dishonored his memory by losing the symbol of our love. "Ellie," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That ring. Where did you get that ring?" The table went quiet. Margaret stopped mid-sentence about her grandson's scholarship. Even the kids playing in the living room seemed to sense the tension and lowered their voices. Ellie looked down at her hand, then back at me with those cold blue eyes that had never shown me an ounce of genuine warmth in the 3 years she'd been married to my son. A slow smile spread across her face. "Oh, this old thing?" She held up her hand, letting the diamonds catch the light. "Matteo gave it to me. Said it belonged in the family." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's my wedding ring, Ellie. I've been looking for it everywhere." That's when my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was just 15, the man I'd worked double shifts to put through college, that's when Matteo laughed. Not a gentle chuckle or an embarrassed laugh, but a cold, cruel sound that I'd never heard from him before. "Mom," he said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, "Dad gave me that ring before he died. He told me to give it to someone who actually deserved it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling dizzy. "What are you talking about?" "That's my ring, Matteo. Your father gave it to me when we got married." Ellie giggled, actually giggled, and took a sip of wine. "Tell her the rest, baby." Matteo's eyes met mine across the table, and for a moment I saw a stranger. Not my son. Not the little boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, but someone I didn't recognize at all. "Dad told me right before he died that he never really loved you, Mom. He said he stayed with you out of obligation, but this ring..." He gestured toward Ellie's hand. "This was meant for someone special. Someone who wasn't just convenient." The room spun around me. Margaret gasped. My brother-in-law cleared his throat uncomfortably. The children had gone completely silent in the other room. "That's not true," I whispered, but even as I said it, doubt crept into my voice. Had Robert really felt that way? Had our entire marriage been a lie? "Mom, you need to face reality," Matteo continued, his voice getting louder. "Dad told me everything. How he settled for you because he felt sorry for you. How he wished he'd waited for someone better. This ring represents real love, not whatever you two had." Ellie stretched her hand out, admiring the ring. "It fits me perfectly. Like it was always meant to be mine." I stood up so fast my chair nearly toppled over. The faces around the table were a blur of shock and pity. Margaret reached out toward me, but I couldn't bear to see the sympathy in her eyes. I couldn't bear any of it. Without another word, I walked to my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. My hands were shaking as I placed it on the table in front of Matteo. "Read this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then we'll see who's telling the truth." As I walked toward the door, I heard Ellie's voice behind me, still dripping with false sweetness. "She's really losing it, isn't she?" But I didn't look back. Something told me that envelope would speak louder than any words I could ever say. 3 days passed before Margaret called me. 3 days of sitting in my empty house, replaying Matteo's cruel words over and over until I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had Robert really felt that way about me? Had I been so blind to his true feelings? "Sharon, honey," Margaret's voice was gentle but urgent. You need to know what happened after you left. I'd been expecting this call, but I still wasn't prepared for it. I sat down heavily in Robert's old recliner, the one I couldn't bring myself to get rid of. They read the letter, she continued. Oh, Sharon. The whole room went dead silent. My chest tightened. What did it say, Margaret? I never read it myself. There was a pause. Robert wrote it 2 weeks before he died. It was addressed to you, but he asked Matteo to keep it sealed until Matteo tried to hurt you somehow. He knew, Sharon. Somehow he knew this day would come. I closed my eyes, feeling tears I'd been holding back for days finally start to fall. Tell me what he wrote. Margaret's voice shook as she recounted it. My dearest Sharon, if you're reading this, it means our son has chosen greed over love, lies over truth. I pray this day never comes, but I know Matteo better than I wanted to admit. He's been asking about inheritance, about the ring, about what he'll get when I'm gone. He doesn't understand that the greatest treasure I'm leaving behind is you. I pressed my hand to my mouth, sobbing quietly. There was more, Margaret continued. Robert wrote that he gave Matteo a cheap replica of your ring months before he died, hoping it would satisfy his greed. He hid your real ring in his desk drawer with this letter. He wrote that he couldn't bear the thought of you believing, even for a moment, that you weren't the love of his life. The real ring is still in his desk? Ellie must have found it and switched them. But that's not the worst part, Sharon. Robert documented everything. Every time Matteo asked for money, every lie he told about needing help, every manipulation. He wrote that Matteo had been stealing from you both for months, taking money from your purse, selling things from the house. I felt sick. I thought I was going crazy. Things kept disappearing. Robert knew. He was protecting you the only way he could. The letter went on for 3 pages about how much he loved you, how you were his anchor, his peace, his everything. He begged your forgiveness for not confronting Matteo sooner, for being too weak to face what his son had become. Through my tears I managed to ask, how did Matteo react? Margaret's voice turned cold. He went white as a sheet. Ellie started sputtering, trying to say the letter was fake, that you must have written it somehow. But everyone could see Robert's handwriting, his signature. And then, she paused. Then the strangest thing happened. What? Matteo started laughing. Not embarrassed laughing, but this angry, bitter sound. He said it didn't matter what some old letter said, that he was still entitled to his inheritance. Ellie stood up and announced that they weren't giving the ring back because possession is 9/10 of the law. I felt something shift inside me, not sadness anymore, but a cold, clear anger. They're not sorry. Not even a little bit. Matteo said you'd always been too emotional, that Robert probably only wrote that letter because he was sick and sentimental. Ellie said. Margaret hesitated. What did she say? She said that dead men can't contradict their widows, so it was her word against a piece of paper. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Even faced with proof of Robert's love, with evidence of their own lies and theft, they felt no shame. Only entitlement. Margaret, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. Did Robert mention anything else in that letter? About what I should do? Actually, yes. He said there was a key taped under his desk drawer. Said you'd know what it was for when the time came. After I hung up, I walked into Robert's study for the first time since his funeral. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His coffee mug still on the desk, his reading glasses folded beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I found the key exactly where Margaret said it would be. Small brass with a number engraved on it. I knew immediately what it opened. The safety deposit box at First National Bank that Robert had insisted on keeping, even though I'd never understood why. As I held that tiny key in my palm, I finally understood what Robert had been trying to tell me. This wasn't just about a ring or a letter. This was about a father who had seen his son's true nature, and had spent his final months protecting the woman he loved from a betrayal he knew was coming. Tomorrow I would go to that bank. Tonight I would mourn not just for my husband, but for the son I thought I knew, the son who had never really existed at all. The safety deposit box revealed more than I could have imagined. Robert hadn't just left me a letter, he'd left me a roadmap of betrayal that made my stomach turn. Inside were bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, photocopies of checks Matteo had forged, and a small notebook in Robert's careful handwriting documenting every lie, every theft, every manipulation our son had orchestrated over the past 2 years. March 15th found $200 missing from Sharon's purse again. Matteo was here yesterday while she was at book club. April 3rd Matteo asked for $500 for car repairs. His car is fine. Saw him at the casino last Thursday. June 12th Sharon's jewelry box has been tampered with. Her grandmother's pearls are gone. Matteo claimed he never saw them. Page after page of careful documentation, each entry breaking my heart a little more. But the worst was yet to come. At the bottom of the box was a small recording device and a note. Sharon, if you're reading this, press play. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you while I was alive. Robert's voice filled the small bank room, weak but determined. I hired a private investigator, sweetheart. I had to know how deep this went. The recording detailed everything. Matteo wasn't just stealing from us. He'd been running up credit card debt in my name, using my social security number to open accounts I knew nothing about. Ellie wasn't just complicit. She was the mastermind. She'd researched our financial situation before she even started dating Matteo, targeting him specifically because of what she thought he would inherit. The investigator found evidence that Ellie has done this before, Robert's voice continued. 2 previous relationships with older men who had family money. She gets close to the sons, manipulates them into believing their parents don't love them, then helps them claim their inheritance early. I felt nauseous. My son hadn't just become cruel on his own. He'd been systematically poisoned against me by a woman who saw our family as nothing more than a financial opportunity. But Robert's voice wasn't finished. Sharon, I've taken steps to protect you, but I need you to be strong. They're going to try to isolate you from family and friends. They're going to spread lies about your mental state. They've already started. My hands shook as I realized what he meant. In the weeks since the dinner, I'd noticed strange changes. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson had stopped waving when she saw me in the yard. My book club friends seemed distant. When I'd called my cousin Linda last week, she'd sounded uncomfortable, cutting the conversation short. I drove home in a daze, but as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Matteo's car parked in front of my house. He was standing on my porch with 2 people I didn't recognize. A man in a cheap suit and a woman with a clipboard. There she is now, Matteo called out as I approached. His voice was loud, theatrical, meant to be heard by any neighbors who might be listening. Mom, these are the specialists I told you about. Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Hayes from Elder Care Services. The woman stepped forward with a practiced smile. Mrs. Henderson, your son is very concerned about you. He tells us you've been having some confusion lately. Some memory issues. I haven't been having any memory issues, I said firmly, but even as I spoke, I could see Mrs. Patterson peeking through her curtains across the street. Matteo's expression was pure performance, all concerned son and worried love. Mom, you accused Ellie of stealing your ring, remember? Even after I explained that Dad gave it to me. And last week you called Margaret 3 times asking the same question about Thanksgiving dinner. I stared at him. I'd never called Margaret 3 times. I'd called her once, and we'd had a perfectly normal conversation. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Morrison said gently, these kinds of episodes are very common. Nothing to be ashamed of. But we want to make sure you're getting the support you need. I don't need support, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I need my son to stop lying about me. Matteo shook his head sadly, and I saw several neighbors had come out to their yards, drawn by the commotion. You see what I mean? He said to the specialists. She's become very paranoid lately, accusing family members of lying, thinking people are plotting against her. Mrs. Hayes scribbled something on her clipboard. Has she been managing her finances appropriately? We find that's often one of the first areas where we see problems. Actually, Matteo said, that's one of my biggest concerns. She's been making some very questionable decisions with money lately. Large withdrawals, unusual purchases. I'm worried someone might be taking advantage of her. The irony was so twisted I almost laughed. He was describing exactly what he and Ellie had been doing to me, but presenting it as evidence of my incompetence. I think we should schedule a comprehensive evaluation, Dr. Morrison said. Just to establish a baseline, you understand. Make sure she's safe. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Matteo replied, and the relief in his voice was genuine. This was what he'd wanted all along. As they continued talking about me like I wasn't standing right there, I realized Robert had been right about everything. They weren't just after my money, they were after my but Robert had prepared me for this moment. And tomorrow I would be ready to fight back. The whisper campaign began the very next day. I discovered it by accident when I stopped by the grocery store and noticed how differently people were treating me. Mrs. Chun, who had always been chatty at the checkout, barely made eye contact. The bag boy who usually helped me to my car suddenly seemed too busy. Even the pharmacist, who'd known me for 15 years, spoke to me in that slow, careful voice people use with children or the mentally impaired. It was Margaret who finally told me the truth. "Sharon, I have to ask you something and please don't get upset," she said when she called that evening. Are you having any problems with your memory lately?" My heart sank. Why would you ask me that? Well, Matteo called me yesterday. He's very worried about you. He said you've been acting strangely since Robert died, that you're confused about things, making up stories. She paused. He said you accused Ellie of stealing your wedding ring, even though Robert gave it to him before he died. I felt the familiar surge of anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. Margaret, you were there at dinner. You heard me read Robert's letter explaining everything. I know, honey, but... She sounded uncertain now. Matteo said that letter could have been forged, that you've been so grief-stricken, you might have written it yourself and forgotten. The betrayal cut deep. Margaret had been my closest friend for over 20 years. If Matteo could make her doubt me, he could convince anyone. He also mentioned that you've been calling people repeatedly, asking the same questions over and over. And apparently, you've been making large cash withdrawals from your bank account, but can't remember what you spent the money on. None of it was true, but it was all carefully crafted to sound plausible. A grieving widow losing her grip on reality, becoming a danger to herself financially. The perfect setup for a concerned son to step in and take control. Over the next few days, the isolation became systematic. My book club leader called to give me a break from hosting duties until I was feeling better. My hairdresser suggested I might want to reschedule my standing appointment because she'd heard I was having a difficult time. Even my pastor stopped by, not for a friendly visit, but to gently suggest I might benefit from grief counseling. The cruelest part was how reasonable they all sounded. How concerned and caring. They weren't being mean, they were trying to help a poor, confused old woman who didn't know what was real anymore. But I knew exactly what was real. And I was learning just how dangerous the truth could be when no one believed it. The breaking point came when I tried to access my own bank account. The teller, someone I'd known for years, looked at me with genuine sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm afraid there's been a flag placed on your account. Your son came in earlier with some documentation from your doctor about memory concerns. He's requested that we notify him of any large or unusual transactions for your own protection." I felt the walls closing in. What kind of documentation? She looked uncomfortable. I really can't discuss the details, but it's all very standard for situations like this. When family members are concerned about a loved one's cognitive state. "I don't have any cognitive problems," I said, but even as I spoke, I could hear how desperate I sounded. How exactly like someone losing their grip on reality. "Of course not, dear. But these things can be subtle. Your son just wants to make sure no one takes advantage of you." When I got home, Matteo and Ellie were waiting for me in my living room. They'd let themselves in with the spare key I'd given Matteo years ago for emergencies. "We need to talk, Mom," Matteo said, and his tone was different now. Not cruel like at the dinner, but patronizing. The voice of an adult speaking to a difficult child. Ellie sat on my couch like she owned it, still wearing my wedding ring. She was reading through a stack of papers, my papers, I realized. My medical records, bank statements, insurance policies. "We've been thinking," Matteo continued, "and we really believe you'd be happier in a place where people can take better care of you. Somewhere with activities, other people your age, medical staff available around the clock." "You mean a nursing home?" I said flatly. "An assisted living facility," Ellie corrected, as if the euphemism made it less of a prison. "We've already looked at several. Very nice places. You'd have your own apartment, but with support when you need it." "I don't need support. I need my son to stop lying about me. Matteo sighed, the same patient sigh he'd used when he was 12 and I'd asked him to clean his room. Mom, Dr. Morrison's evaluation is next week. After that, we'll have a clearer picture of your situation. But we want you to know that whatever happens, we're here for you. How generous, I said. Considering you'll be living in my house while I'm locked away. Ellie looked up from my bank statements with mock surprise. Sharon, no one's talking about locking you away. And this house will probably need to be sold anyway to pay for your care. These facilities aren't cheap. The casual way she discussed disposing of my life, my home, my independence was breathtaking. They'd already planned it all out. The evaluation would declare me incompetent, they'd get power of attorney, and everything Robert and I had built together would become theirs to do with as they pleased. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was as helpless as they were trying to make me appear. What they didn't know was that Robert had prepared for this exact scenario. And tomorrow, Dr. Morrison was going to get a very different evaluation than he was expecting. Dr. Morrison arrived at my house right on time, briefcase in hand and that practiced smile plastered across his face. Matteo and Ellie flanked him like bodyguards, their expressions a perfect mixture of concern and anticipation. Now, Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Morrison said as he settled into Robert's old chair. This is just a routine evaluation. Nothing to be nervous about. I sat across from them, hands folded in my lap, the picture of a confused elderly woman. I understand, doctor. Matteo explained that you're here to help. For the next hour I played my part perfectly. I hesitated when he asked me what year it was. I looked confused when he mentioned the name of the current president. I told him I couldn't remember what I'd had for breakfast, and when he asked about my daily routine, I gave vague, rambling answers that seemed to confirm every concern Matteo had raised. Mom's been like this for months, Matteo said, shaking his head sadly. Getting worse every week. Sometimes she doesn't even recognize me when I come to visit. Ellie nodded sympathetically. We've been so worried. She accused me of stealing her wedding ring, even though everyone knows Robert gave it to Matteo before he died. She keeps talking about letters and recordings that don't exist. Dr. Morrison scribbled notes, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. This was clearly going exactly as he'd expected. Mrs. Henderson, he said gently, do you remember having dinner with your family a few weeks ago? When you became upset about a ring. I blinked at him with what I hoped looked like confusion. A ring? I think so. Maybe. Things get mixed up sometimes. You see, Matteo said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. She doesn't even remember what she said that night. Dr. Morrison closed his notebook. Well, I think I have enough for a preliminary assessment. Mrs. Henderson, would you mind if I spoke privately with your son and daughter-in-law for a moment? Of course, I said, standing up slowly like my joints ached. I'll just go make some tea. As I shuffled toward the kitchen, I could hear them beginning their conversation in low, serious tones. But they didn't know about the small recording device I'd placed under Robert's chair the night before, following his example of documenting everything. So what's your professional opinion? Matteo asked. Textbook case of moderate dementia, probably Alzheimer's, Dr. Morrison replied. The memory gaps, the paranoid accusations, the confusion about basic facts. She's going to need supervised care and soon. How soon? Ellie's voice was eager. I'd recommend immediate placement. She shouldn't be living alone anymore. And you'll want to get power of attorney established as quickly as possible, before she deteriorates further. What about her finances? Matteo asked. She's been making some questionable decisions with money lately. That's very common. I can provide documentation that she's no longer competent to manage her own affairs. With that, you should be able to take control of her accounts, sell property if necessary to pay for care. I gripped the kitchen counter, listening to them divide up my life like vultures picking over a carcass. There's just one thing, Dr. Morrison continued, and his voice took on a different tone. My fee for this evaluation and the documentation you'll need. It's substantial. Cash only. A long silence. Then Matteo. How substantial? 5,000. Plus another 2,000 for expedited processing of the competency declaration. $7,000? Ellie sounded shocked. This is specialized work. And completely confidential, of course. No one needs to know the exact details of how we reached our conclusions. I almost gasped. They weren't just planning to steal my life. They were paying someone to help them do it illegally. Fine, Matteo said finally. We'll get your money. But we need those papers by Friday. Not a problem. Just remember, if anyone asks, this was a thorough, legitimate evaluation. Your mother answered all my questions, showed clear signs of cognitive decline, and I followed all standard protocols. Understood, Ellie said. And once we have the paperwork, you'll have full legal authority to make decisions for her. Medical, financial, residential. She'll essentially become your ward. I heard chairs scraping as they stood up. My hands were shaking as I poured water into the teapot, trying to look busy when they came back into the kitchen. Well, Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Morrison said in that patronizing tone, I think we're all done here. You just focus on resting and let your family take care of everything else. After they left, I sat in my empty house listening to the recording I just made. $7,000 to destroy an innocent woman's life. A fake evaluation that would strip away every right I had. But they'd made a critical error. In their greed and haste, they'd confessed to conspiracy and fraud on tape. And tomorrow I would make sure the right people heard every word. Robert had been right about everything. He'd known this day would come, and he'd prepared me for it. Now it was time to spring the trap he'd so carefully set. The game was about to change, and this time I held all the cards. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I dressed carefully, not like the confused old woman I'd been pretending to be, but like the sharp, competent person I'd always been. Today the performance would end. Margaret arrived first as I'd asked her to. Her face was worried, uncertain. Sharon, honey, are you sure about this? Matteo said you've been having such a hard time lately. Sit down, Margaret, I said, pouring her coffee in my best china cups. There are some things you need to hear. 20 minutes later, when Matteo and Ellie walked into my living room with Dr. Morrison and his fraudulent paperwork, they found Margaret sitting beside me with tears streaming down her face and fury blazing in her eyes. What's she doing here? Matteo demanded, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Margaret's here as a witness, I said calmly. Please, all of you, sit down. We have some things to discuss. Dr. Morrison looked nervous. Mrs. Henderson, we're here to finalize your care arrangements. Perhaps your friend should come back another time. Oh, she's staying, I said. And for the first time in weeks, I let my real voice show through, clear, strong, and completely lucid. In fact, she's heard some very interesting recordings. The color drained from Matteo's face. What recordings? I picked up the small device from the coffee table. The same kind your father used to document your theft, Matteo. Did you really think I wouldn't learn from his example? Ellie grabbed Matteo's arm. She's bluffing. She doesn't remember anything, remember? Dr. Morrison's evaluation proved it. Ah yes, Dr. Morrison's evaluation. I looked directly at the man who'd been planning to destroy my life for money. The one where you diagnosed me with dementia based on a performance you paid $7,000 to witness? Dr. Morrison stood up abruptly. I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard you admitting to fraud, I said, my voice ice cold. I heard you discussing how to forge medical documents. I heard you planning to give my son a legal power of attorney based on a fake diagnosis. You're confused, Mom, Matteo said, but his voice was shaking now. You're having one of your episodes. I laughed for the first time in months. Episodes? The only episode here is the one you three performed in my living room yesterday. Margaret, would you like to play the recording for them? Margaret, bless her, had recovered from her shock and was now magnificently angry. She pressed play on the device and Dr. Morrison's voice filled the room. Textbook case of moderate dementia. Completely confidential, of course. $5,000 plus another $2,000 for expedited processing. As his own words played back, Dr. Morrison bolted for the door. But Margaret's husband was waiting outside. I'd called him that morning and asked him to drop by around this time. Going somewhere, Doc? Jim's voice boomed from the front yard. Ellie was backing toward the window, my wedding ring catching the light as she clutched her purse. This is entrapment. You can't record people without their consent. Actually, I can, I said pleasantly. This is my house, and in this state, I only need one party's consent to record a conversation. That party would be me. Matteo was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You were faking it. The whole time. Every confused look, every hesitant answer, every moment of supposed memory loss. I stood up and I felt taller than I had in months. Did you really think your father would leave me defenseless against someone like you? I walked to Robert's desk and pulled out a thick folder. Your father documented everything, Matteo. Every theft, every lie, every manipulation. He also updated his will 3 weeks before he died, removing you entirely. The silence in the room was deafening. The house, the investments, the life insurance, none of it was ever going to be yours. Robert saw who you really were, and he protected me from you the only way he could. Ellie made a desperate grab for her purse, but Margaret was faster. Looking for this? She held up my real wedding ring, the one I'd taken from Ellie's jewelry box that morning while she was showering. Turns out breaking into someone's house works both ways. That's impossible, Ellie whispered. I had the ring with me. You had the fake one, I said. The cheap replica Robert gave Matteo. I've been wearing the real one under a bandage on my finger all week, waiting for this moment. I slipped my true wedding ring back onto my finger where it belonged. After all these months, it felt like coming home. The police should be here any minute, Margaret announced, checking her watch. Jim called them after he heard the recording, and they were. Through the window, I could see 2 patrol cars pulling into my driveway. As they led Dr. Morrison away in handcuffs, and as Matteo and Ellie stood there realizing that their scheme had not only failed but landed them in serious legal trouble, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert died. Peace. 3 months later, I was sitting in my garden with Margaret, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The house was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time in years. Matteo had been sentenced to 18 months for fraud and theft. Ellie got 2 years. Dr. Morrison lost his license and got 5 years in federal prison. The scandal had made the local papers, and suddenly everyone remembered what a sharp, competent woman I'd always been. Any regrets? Margaret asked, sipping her wine. I thought about it, twirling my real wedding ring around my finger. Only one. I wish Robert could have seen how it ended. But somehow I think he knew. In his final letter, the real final letter I'd found in the safety deposit box, he'd written, Sharon, my darling, you are stronger than you know. Trust yourself. Trust the truth. And remember that real love never dies. It just finds new ways to protect what matters most. I kept that letter. Unlike the one I'd shared with everyone else, this one was just for me. A love letter that proved, beyond any doubt, that I had been treasured, cherished, and above all believed in by the man who knew me best. The sun set completely, and Margaret went home to her own family. I sat alone in my garden, surrounded by the roses Robert had planted for me, wearing the ring he'd chosen for me, living in the home he'd protected for me. I was 58 years old, and for the first time in my life I was exactly where I belonged.